I recently wrote an article titled, Can You Change Your Capacities? In which I was just trying to make the point that capacities and the amount that you can handle is determined essentially by the choices that you make and the trade offs that you're willing to make in order to have the room, the space, the ability to handle the different things in your life. And so with that, I had been talking to a friend, and from that, I kind of thought about another notion that I think is related to this, which is that just because something is hard doesn't mean you're failing at it or that there's something wrong with what you're doing. Because I was thinking about the notion of capacities and thinking about, how much a person can handle. And sometimes the perception is that if it feels hard or if something feels difficult or if you feel stretched, then that means either you're not succeeding in that thing or you're failing or that you don't have room for it in your life because it's hard or it shouldn't be in your life because it's hard. And so, yeah, so I'm going to ask myself the question, what if, what if you feel like you're at your end, you made all the trade-offs that you believe that you could make, and it still feels hard. Or maybe it's not even about, the different trade-offs that you should or should not make, but just in general, things feel hard. Feels like you maybe can't handle it. In particular, I think, this notion to me is easier talked about in the context of motherhood, right? That if motherhood feels hard, if your vocation just a um feels like just such a weight and it's such a struggle, what if, yeah, you kind of have come to the end of your rope and you feel like it's just you can't do anything to make it easier. You can't do anything, you can't shift things around to um make it not feel as difficult, as strenuous, as light, as easy, right? So therefore it's hard. Does that mean that you're doing something wrong? And so I think the two things that came to mind when I asked myself that question, what if you gave up everything? What if you did all that you could and it still feels hard? These are the two things that came to mind. Was the first thing is that all of life is hard. Like all of life, that you can't get around things being hard. You can't get around suffering. And so ultimately at the end of the day, you have to just ask yourself, is this thing that is difficult, if this is this thing that is hard, worth the suffering that you're experiencing? Because being a good mom, or whatever, let's paint a hypothetical picture, right? A good mom, quote unquote, is, a woman who wakes up early, that Proverbs 31 woman, she makes everything from scratch. She has a garden, whatever different stereotypes. She's checking off all the boxes in a sense. It's hard to be that mom, right? It takes work to be that kind of mom. It takes work to have those kinds of skills, build those sort of capacities, do those sort of things. It is also hard to be a quote unquote bad mom. I'm just going to just paint a general picture. It's hard to be a quote unquote bad mom. It's hard to be a mom that maybe lets her children do whatever they want. It's hard to be the mom who lets their kids run wild or neglect them, not giving them what they need, doesn't gives them junk food all the time, doesn't spend quality time with them, doesn't lift them up or encourage them, doesn't strengthen them in their faith. It's still hard to be that quote unquote bad mom, because not just because um, there's going to be negative consequences that come from that kind of parenting, but because the nature of being a mother, the nature of being a parent is in itself just hard. And so you kind of just have to pick, which hard do you want? Because the reality is you're not going to eradicate the hardness from your life. That is just the nature of being a parent. That is the nature of being a mother. It would be like somebody running a marathon, and it would be wrong for you to say, when they're, half an hour into the marathon, then they're starting to sweat and they're, they're struggling, they're sweating, they're struggling, to say, if your form was better, you would probably have an easier time running that marathon. Or if you trained this certain way, or if you wore this kind of clothing, or it's your shoes, or whatever, thing, that they would have an easier time running that marathon. And sure, in that analogy, like there's holes in everything, right? You could say maybe that would improve. Sure, it might improve their experience of the marathon if maybe, yeah, they change different things about their lives. But running a marathon will never be the same as chilling in a hammock doing nothing and and eating junk food or eating ice cream. That just the nature of a marathon is that it's difficult, is that it's hard. And that's the same thing I think with your vocation, with being a mother, with being a parent, is the nature of it is just that it's hard. And so therefore you're not necessarily doing something wrong, and you're not failing, and you're not a bad mom or a bad parent, or you can't handle it just because it's difficult. That is the nature of the game. And you have to ask yourself, which game do you want to play? Do you want to play the game that leads to success, or you want to play the game that leads to you losing? You get to pick. So to close, I think I had 2 points, but I think they're kind of 2 points sort of wrapped up into one. I thought there were two distinct ones, but maybe you only heard one, or maybe you heard two. But I think the 2 points that I was essentially trying to make, the first being is that everything is hard, and you just have to pick which hard you want. The one where you play the game and you win, or the one where you play the game and you lose. And then the second point being that hard does not equal failing, unsuccessful, or that you can't handle it. It's just the nature of the game. Thanks for joining me for this musing. Till next time. Bye.